and welcome to the Royal Festival Hall and this short film exploring Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik Movement 3. My name is Rachel Leach and today's music is performed for us by the London Philharmonic Orchestra with their conductor Tim Murray. Mozart wrote his Eine kleine Nachtmusik in 1787 when he was at the peak of his fame, but he would never have imagined that we would still be listening to it today or that it would be one of his most famous pieces. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was born in 1756 in Salzburg, Austria. He wrote his first pieces of music at the age of 5, his first symphony at 8, his first opera at 11, and by 25 he was famous, the center of the musical world in Vienna. He died in 1791, aged 35, when he was sadly burnt out and exhausted. Mozart really is the central figure of the classical period. He wrote about 600 works, and all of them are pinnacles of the classical style, a style that is defined by perfect structures, clear harmonies, light textures, and singable melodies. Mozart added in a large dash of flair and personality into everything he wrote and managed to produce some of the greatest music the world has ever known. So let's talk about Eine kleine Nachtmusik. The truth is that we really don't know why this piece was written, but we do know that it was written in 1787 at the same time as Mozart was working on a dark and dramatic opera called Don Giovanni. So maybe he wrote this piece as a bit of light relief from that serious opera, or maybe because he needed a bit of quick extra cash. Mozart was often in need of extra money. Whatever the reason, it probably wasn't performed in Mozart's lifetime and came to light long after his death. The piece is in the popular form of a serenade. A serenade is a light piece of music intended to be performed during a celebratory event. So think of background music to a wedding or a party. The name Eine kleine Nachtmusik is often translated as a little night music, but is equally correctly translated as a little serenade. It was written initially for 2 violins, viola, cello, and bass, but it is perhaps more often heard today performed by full string section, and that's how you'll hear it later on. The full piece has got 4 movements in the same overall shape as a symphony. So we have something fast, something slow, a dance, and a flashy finale. It certainly wasn't intended to be a major work, but it is now one of Mozart's most performed pieces, and that's probably because of the iconic opening to the first movement, which really does sum up the sound of the classical period. We're not going to explore that movement today, but it is an excellent example of sonata form. We just heard the first subject of the exposition section, and if you were to have listened on, you would be able to plot out the rest of sonata form really rather easily. Mozart is closely following the rules. We're going to look at movement 3, which is a minuet and trio. A minuet and trio is a piece in 3/4 time that originally would have been danced to. Minuets are often light, charming pieces with a contrasting trio section in the middle and then a return to the minuet music at the end. So the overall shape of a minuet and trio is ternary form, A, B, A. This one is a perfect example of the form because Mozart is following all of the rules typical of the classical period. So we begin with an 8-bar theme in the home key of G major. I'm going to call it theme A. Here it is. That theme and all of the themes in this piece begins with an anacrusis. Anacrusis is the term we use for a theme that begins before the strong beat of the bar, so it starts on the upbeat. Originally, minuets were danced to, so the anacrusis gives the dancers a sense of preparation before they step onto that first strong beat. It's sort of like an in-breath. The way I remember the term anacrusis is I think of a girl called Anna Crucis, and maybe she's leaning on that bar line. So let's hear that anacrusis again and see if you can get that sense of in-breath or preparation to the theme. The melody here is detached. That means it's made of short, separated notes, and they move stepwise, so they are conjunct. The opening 8-bar theme is actually made up of 2 4-bar phrases. The first 4 bars present a question and sound like this. The second 4 bars present an answer to the question with some added decoration. Mozart adds in some ornaments. In this case, they are trills. The melody is played by the first and second violins. At the end of bar 8, you'll see some repeat marks. This tells us that the whole theme, the whole 8 bars, repeats around for a second time. It begins in the home key of G major and moves through the primary chords of that key, so there's nothing too unusual there. It ends with a perfect cadence. So here's the A theme for the second time. Cadence is the term that we use for 2 chords placed at the end of a phrase, a section, or a piece. A perfect cadence is chords 5 to 1, dominant to tonic. So here we have D major to G major. It's called a perfect cadence because it's the most perfect ending that you can get. It feels the most finished and closed. So here it is in isolation. Mozart follows his opening theme, theme A, with another 8-bar theme, theme B, and this one presents a bit of contrast. Here it is. So we have quite a contrast here. The melody is given to the violins and is smooth and slurred. It is legato. And it breaks down into 2 4-bar phrases. The first phrase is simpler than the second. Mozart adds some decorations, some ornaments to the second phrase. And the second phrase is borrowed from theme A. We begin and end in G major, but the harmony is a little bit more complex with some diminished 7th chords and a perfect cadence on the end. The repeat marks show us that the theme again goes around twice. So let's hear it for a second time. There's one more important thing to point out here. Mozart adds some chromatic notes to his melody. The accidentals, the sharps, the flats, and naturals show as well. This chromatic movement is added to make the tune sound a little bit more slippery. So let's listen to the violin's theme in isolation, and hopefully you'll spot just how slippery it is. The minuet is therefore made up of 2 8-bar themes, each of which repeat. So we have A, A, B, B. The trio is the middle section, and like the minuet, it begins with an 8-bar theme that starts with an anacrusis. Trios were originally called trios because they were played by 3 instruments. But Mozart has 5 instruments to deal with here. First violin, second violin, viola, cello, and bass. And so he does a very clever thing. If you look carefully at the score, you'll see that the melody is given to the first violin. The bass line is given to the cellos and the basses. And so in the middle, the second violin and the viola have very similar material. They have an accompanying figure. So Mozart has managed to create a 3-part texture. Melody, accompaniment, and bass. Very clever. The first theme of the trio is in the dominant key of D major, and that's really easy to spot because we have a change to the key signature. We now have 2 sharps. We also begin and end in D major with a perfect cadence on the end. The tune is again conjunct and flowing. It moves stepwise and it is smooth or legato. Mozart uses some chromatic movement again. Things start to get slippery around bar 19 and continue on to the end. Again, we have repeat marks at the end of the phrase and a perfect cadence in D. So trio theme A is also played twice. As we hear it for a second time, listen out for that chromatic movement in the violin. Mozart finishes his trio with one more new theme. It begins with 4 bars of new material before recapping all of trio theme A from bar 29 with some added chromatic slips. We also have another perfect cadence on the end made up of chords 2, 5, 1 in D. So here's trio theme B. So far, we've heard the minuet made up of 2 8-bar themes, both of which repeat, and then the trio made up of 2 themes, both of which repeat. Then we return back to the minuet and hear both themes again, but without repeats. Mozart writes DC or da capo onto his score, which means from the beginning. So the structure is minuet A-A-B-B, trio A-A-B-B, minuet A-B. Or you could say the overall structure is simple ternary form, A, B, A, minuet, trio, minuet. And the reason for all of these repeats is that Mozart needed to make his music instantly longer without having to invent too many new ideas. So adding repeat marks is the quickest way of doing this, and that's really handy if, like Mozart, you were paid by the minute and you needed the cash quickly. Also, classical composers really liked symmetry, so by repeating sections and themes, they work to get their music as balanced and symmetrical as possible. Mozart never intended his minuet to be danced to, but it really could be because it's got such a perfect structure. And he never intended his Eine kleine Nachtmusik to rank as one of his most popular pieces. But here we are, 230 years later, still talking about it. And that's because it's a little piece of perfection written by a true genius. Here's the full piece.